Well, I hope you had a good week. This is Brandon from freestatecolorado.com with your weekly roundup for February 17th, 2023. I'll cover some stories of the week and some other interesting information. We're going to start off this week from the centersquare.com. Bill would give Colorado counties power to restrict discharge of firearms. Now, unfortunately, this is another example of the anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment, anti-self-defense policies that we're seeing come out of the Democrat-controlled legislature in Denver. So Colorado counties would be able to prohibit people from discharging firearms in specific unincorporated areas under a bill moving through the state house. So this bill is an anti-freedom, anti-self-defense proposition. Currently, a board of county commissioners can designate unincorporated areas of a county where it's illegal to discharge firearms. However, the commissioners can't prohibit the discharge of firearms in shooting galleries on private grounds or in residences in circumstances where persons and property aren't endangered. So that's the problem the state legislators have, is this line right here, that county commissioners cannot prohibit the discharge of firearms on private grounds. They want to tell you that on your own private property in rural Colorado, you are not allowed to legally discharge a firearm. Now, you might be training somebody to learn how to defend themselves, might be brushing up on your skills. Maybe you're, taking care of some varmints or some predators. Well, unfortunately, these Democrats in the state legislature want to make that illegal. House Bill 23-1165 repeals the exemption for private property. So basically, private property would no longer be exempt from the county commissioner's control. Now, this is a Soviet-style, tyrannical, authoritarian bill, and I'm trying to be kind here in the words I want to use because I'm not going to swear. HB 1165 is a blatantly unconstitutional bill that violates our Second Amendment and private property rights, Christy Burton Brown, chair of the Colorado Republican Party, said in a statement on Wednesday. The Colorado Democrats advance this anti-gun bill in the state house. Every day, they try a new, extreme, and ridiculous way to strip our constitutional rights away. Now, she's completely right there. To see what the Democrats are doing to change our culture, to shift people away from gun ownership, to have people not know how to defend themselves is absolutely abhorrent. This bill is sponsored by Representatives Judy Amabile from Boulder, no surprise there, Karen McCormick, also of Boulder, and then on the state Senate you have Dylan Roberts from Clear Creek, that guy's a piece of work, and Sonia Jaquez Lewis, also from Boulder. So you have three Boulder representatives and this doofus from Clear Creek, basically trying to tell the rest of rural Colorado that, hey, we don't think you should be able to use firearms on your own property. I mean, absolutely and utterly ridiculous. The Rocky Mountain gun owners criticized Republicans for not being more forceful during Tuesday's debate. Fortunate reality in Colorado is we do have some weak Republicans who are not very strong on the Second Amendment rights. Such a disappointment, Rocky Mountain gun owners posted on social media. Nearly no resistance was shown in fighting the private property shooting ban. It's a sad state of affairs when we can't even trust Republicans to fight back. Friends, this is exactly why we need better legislators and better politicians serving in government. If you've heard the call, please join or get involved with the candidate running for office. They're trying to basically ban our ability to defend ourselves and just use firearms on rural private property. And that's how extreme this is. Let's move on to another article. This is something to celebrate this week. Senate Bill 23-101, candidate ballot access for primary elections. Concerning candidate ballot access for primary elections. This bill was defeated, thankfully. This bill would have made it much more difficult for people to run for office in Colorado. Effectively, this bill would have banned caucuses, eliminating caucuses from being used to get candidates on the ballot. So going through the political party assembly process, whether you're a minor or a major political party, would be not allowed anymore. This bill would have required you to have expensive signature gathering in place in order to get on the ballot. Now, that could cost tens of thousands of dollars if you wanted to run for state Senate, or excuse me, even U.S. Senate, Congress. But yes, state House, state Senate, mostly statewide races are obviously be more expensive because they require more signatures. But even anything above the county level, you'd be required to get signatures. You'd have to pay somebody or go get signatures yourself in order to get on the ballot. So thankfully, this bill was stopped. There was some great testimony heard on it by a lot of people from the minor parties, including the Libertarian Party, Green Party, Unity Party, and a few others who spoke out against it. Even the Colorado Democratic Party was against it. It's really shameful and sad to see Senator Barbara Kirkmeyer, Representative Mary Bradfeld, and Bob Garland come out in support of this legislation. Of course, Larry Liston, who was also on the state Senate Veterans and Military Affairs Committee, voted in support of it. These representatives want to make it harder for you to get on the ballot. They want to eliminate Colorado's caucus system, effectively getting grassroots activists and grassroots politics out of the state. So good that it was stopped. And pay attention to these people. They are snakes, and they are totally not worthy of your support. Let's move on. Another anti-gun bill, unfortunately. Colorado Newsline is a left-of-center website, kind of presents itself as a mainstream news source. However, they are totally focused on presenting an authoritarian viewpoint and agenda on Colorado. So this bill, of course, I'm sure they are pretty excited about. This article, Democrats plan to introduce bill that would allow gun violence victims to sue firearm companies. I mean, totally outrageous that you can somehow think that a firearm manufacturer is responsible for somebody using that firearm in the commission of a crime or in some sort of violent situation that was unjustified. I mean, come on. Should an automobile manufacturer be held liable if somebody uses their car as a weapon? Should a hammer manufacturer be held liable if they use a hammer in the commission of a crime? I mean, this is absolutely and utterly ridiculous. Of course, this makes no sense. It's just another blatant attempt to strip us of our Second Amendment rights and to put gun manufacturers out of business. So some of the people behind it, State Senator Sonia Yaquez Lewis would introduce this legislation this session to repeal the state's industry immunity policy that protects gun sellers and manufacturers from most lawsuits. I mean, absolutely and utterly insane. Of course, she was at an anti-gun town hall hosted by a Giffords group. So these out-of-state, left-wing, authoritarian lobbyists are coming into Colorado, buying up our politicians and pushing this anti-gun agenda. Of course, who else is involved? Senator Chris Kolker, now Javier Marbury, this Denver Democrat. That guy is an avowed socialist, and I'm not being hyperbolic here. Jennifer Parenti, an Erie Democrat, another total and utter nutcase at our state house. So unfortunately, this bill is probably going to gain some traction. Of course, you got Tom Sullivan, the damaged psychologically individual who's trying to take away our ability to defend ourselves. I mean, these people are not going to stop until they are out of office. So the call is to get these people out of office by running against them and supporting their opponents. People, they are going to do everything they can to restrict your ability to defend yourself. They do not see you as a person that should be allowed to own a firearm. You need to get that through your head because this is what they have planned and they're going to keep trying. They're getting more bold. They feel like they have a mandate and they are totally wrong. Moving on. So after we just looked at some of the most horrendous gun control bills that we've seen coming through our state legislature, of course, we need to talk about the real situation in Denver and in Colorado communities across the state. This is from Out There, Colorado, February 14th, 2023. Denver crime up 75% since 2008. Dangerous crime wave underway. So, of course, violent crime is through the roof, and Colorado Democrats don't want to address it. They don't really care, it seems. What they really want to do is prevent law-abiding citizens from being able to defend themselves. Denver is in the midst of a dangerous crime wave, according to a recent research study conducted by the Common Sense Institute. Well, it sure is common sense because you can see it on the headlines of newspapers and news stories and news websites every day. Colorado's capital city is among the 10 worst cities in the United States for crime. No surprise there. In 2022, Denver's average monthly crime rate was 43% higher than in 2019 and 75% higher than in 2008. So, I mean, 2008 wasn't that long ago, right? I mean, to think that crime is 75% higher is pretty scary. Data revealed that of the cities surveyed, Denver was ranked third for most motor vehicle thefts in the country. No surprise there. We see that headlines every day. 293% increase since 2014, when Colorado passed statutory reductions to motor vehicle penalties. Now, Denver was also identified as the 6th worst city for property crimes and the 10th worst city for rape. Now, think about that for a second. Property crimes are through the roof. Car thefts are through the roof. Violent crimes like rape are happening at an outrageous rate, and they want to take away a woman's ability to defend herself from some sort of violent attacker. It's not right. It's not right at all. The average monthly crime rate in the city has reportedly increased by 75% since 2018. In 2022, the crime rate in Denver was reportedly 58% higher than the state average. I mean, folks, we see what's happening in our state. Crime is going through the roof. And I hate to keep reiterating it, but you got to get involved. We got to get involved in the community and try and make a positive impact. Let's move on. Armstrong has an article this week that came out on February 14th, 2023. Now, as I say every week, CompleteColorado.com is a website you should be checking every day. It's a great news aggregator that provides a lot of information about what we're seeing happen, both political and non-political stories. Page 2 is their original reporting and commentary section. Let's commodify housing in Colorado. If Puritanism is, as H.L. Mencken quipped, quote, the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy, end quote, then progressivism is, as others have noted, the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be making a profit. Sorry, I was starting to laugh there, but it's true, progressivism is the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be making a profit. Of course, these state legislators don't understand economics. So many of these Democratic politicians do not understand what profit actually means. Profit means you're actually doing a service to your community and you're being rewarded for it. If what you're doing is not profitable, it means nobody wants to buy your product or service, and you should probably do something differently. Continuing with Ari Armstrong's article, we see that dynamic at play in the debates over housing in Colorado. To expand the housing supply and bring down prices, we need to free up the market so that developers can build housing and people can use it without arbitrary government constraints. Hear, hear. Instead, progressives, prejudiced as they are against profit-seeking developers and owners of rental housing, want to further bind housing and regulations, thereby making it relatively scarcer and more expensive. In this article, he discusses 3 examples. So, of course, these politicians do not understand how markets work. They do not understand how prices work. They don't understand how profits work. So their solution, of course, is to try and control things. They think a regimented, authoritarian, top-down control system is somehow going to work. Well, it doesn't. It fails continuously. As Ari points out in his article, these government controls are going to make housing scarcer, really end up driving up prices and making it a lot harder for people to rent in the Denver metro area, and probably other areas in Colorado as well. The first bill he talks about is House Bill 1068, which would forbid owners of rental properties to charge extra damage deposits or increased rent to tenants who wish to own pets, while forcing some to allow all pets, regardless of size or breed. This bill also prohibits insurers to deny a homeowner's policy because of dogs, with an exception for dogs the government has declared dangerous. It creates a new dog damage welfare bureaucracy. I covered this bill in a couple weeks ago, but the idea is these Colorado Democrats want to create affordable, equitable, pet-inclusive housing of course, at the expense of the landlords and property owners. Absolutely and utterly insane. HB 1171 is another one he's talking about, which would make it harder for landlords to evict tenants. This bill prohibits a landlord from evicting a residential tenant unless a landlord has just cause for eviction. And who decides what cause is just? The government, of course. Otherwise, the property owner must pay the tenant at least 2 months' rent to relocate. I mean, come on, who would want to rent property out? Who would want to be a landlord in Colorado if this bill passes? If you can't evict your tenants because you don't like what they're doing to your property, then, then you're in a bad position. When you really think about it too, these Colorado Democrats are so against profit and they're against these greedy landlords and property managers who are trying to take money from the renters. But then why would they evict people unnecessarily if they didn't have to, right? That's how they're making their profits. That's how they're bringing in money, is by having renters there who are paying their bills every month. Eviction is a last resort. It's absolutely crazy to think that, property owners are just evicting people willy-nilly over meaningless things. Moving on to the last bill that Ari talks about in his article is 1115, would give local governments virtually unlimited power to impose rent controls, which discourage development of new housing and maintenance of existing housing. Rent control, price controls on housing, is so stupid and destructive that even the Colorado Sun's Diane Carmen, whom I cannot offhand recall ever before criticizing a new government program, unless it involved abortion restrictions or the like, recognizes, quoting an academic friend of hers, that rent control, quote, decreases affordability, fuels gentrification, and creates negative spillovers, end quote. Totally, totally true. I love Ari's last sentence here, last paragraph to conclude it. You got to read this article. It really spells out what's going on in the housing fight in Colorado. The problem with housing is not that people are able to buy, sell, and rent it. The problem is that in important ways, government prevents people from providing and using housing by mutual consent in the market. The problem is not that property owners profit by selling or renting housing, but that government often forcibly prevents them from doing so. We need legislators not to further restrict housing, but to fully legalize it. Here, here. If we freed the market and allowed property owners to rent out their garage, their basement, a spare room, the little cottage or shed they have in the back, I mean, that's still better than somebody sleeping on the streets. Let the market solve the problems. Government can never solve our problems, only creates more problems. Next, I want to talk about my article from this week from freestatecolorado.com. 2022 Election and Review, Part 3, State House. So I went through and did a deep dive analysis of the state house races last year. Now, it took a little bit of time. There's 65 state legislators serving in the state house currently, and has been that way for a while. But there's really 5 that I see as the key key to flip in 2024. But I actually went through the 12 closest races of 2022, and really I'd love to see all 12 of those seats flip from Democrats to Republicans. And why? Well, right now the current balance of power is 46 Democrats to 19 Republicans. So although this is a tremendous disparity in the balance of power, I believe the Republicans have an opportunity to gain seats. All of Colorado's 65 House seats are up every 2 years, so the time to plan for the next election is now. So in this article, I review the 12 House seats that were won with under 3,000 votes in the 2022 election. So just to give you an example of some of the analysis, this is House District 16. Democrat Stephanie Vigil won, beat Republican Dave Donaldson. Margin of victory was only 710 votes. I mean, 710 votes isn't much, especially when you consider the massive amount of money that was spent on this race. And it really is possible that a Republican could have won it. So pretty interesting to see. I go through the spending, how much the campaign spent. I mean, Vigil's campaign spent quite a bit more. What is that? 40% more than what Donaldson spent. And of course, the outside spending by these big money groups like Blue Flower Action pumped, at least $30,000 into her race that I was able to see. Donaldson was supported by Unite for Colorado Action. But a lot of that money was spent over multiple candidates, so it's really hard to tell how much money went specifically to his race. Can't imagine too much, especially based on the results. And House District 16 is in El Paso County, this portion of Colorado Springs, and is very winnable for Republicans. So I kind of go through each of those 12 seats, the spending, the results, look at the maps, and provide some thoughts for how these seats can be flipped in 2024. But really, 5 key seats that can be flipped would change the dynamic of the Colorado legislature. If Republicans win those 5 seats, they'll have 24 seats in the 2024 election cycle. So 24 and 24 is the rally cry that I'm hoping Republicans adopt. But check it out. If you're interested in the state legislature, if you're interested in running for office, if you're interested in supporting Liberty candidates and fighting back against the legislation that we've been looking at, then I hope you find this valuable. Moving on. Centersquare.com again, February 10th, 2023. Colorado restaurants rally members against Fair Workweek bill. The Fair Workweek bill is not fair at all. If you are a business owner, a manager, if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you have a small business and you're really trying to make an impact in your community, this bill would be absolutely devastating for you. Say, for example, you have a restaurant, then this bill would require you to post hours, to not be able to change an employee's schedule if needed without giving them notice. I mean, it's absolutely and utterly insane. Let's look at the article. The Colorado Restaurant Association is rallying its members to speak out against a bill in the House of Representatives regarding work scheduling. House Bill 23-1118 would require businesses with more than 250 employees and all food and beverage establishments to obtain from employees a written statement of their desired number of weekly work hours and the days and times they're available to work. Employers will be required to provide written notice of employee work schedules no later than 14 days before the first day of any new work schedule. So, I mean, 2 weeks in advance to have to give your employees a schedule, I mean, that could be very difficult. Now, if you're an employer, if you're a business owner, you're going to err on the side of caution, I imagine, and really cut that schedule down and not give them as many hours as you would otherwise because you don't know if you can get them all those hours, you know? The bill also gives employees the right to refuse hours or a work shift less than 12 hours after the end of the previous shift. If an employee consents to work within 12 hours of the previous shift, employers will be required to make rest shortfall pay of 1.5 times their regular pay rate. So, I mean, this bill is holding employers hostage. It's making it extremely difficult for restaurants to operate in Colorado, and it's going to chase out a lot of businesses. Quote, this legislation has the potential to dramatically change the restaurant industry in Colorado and negatively impact restaurant workers by instituting devastating, burdensome requirements on restaurants. End quote. The association wrote in a letter to its members and other members of the Colorado restaurant community. Employees would be entitled to receive, quote, predictability pay, end quote, when an employer makes changes to an employee's schedule. If an employer provides work hours to a new employee without first offering the hours to an existing employee, the employer will be required to, quote, give retention pay, end quote, to their employees. I mean, this 33-page bill, these people are absolutely anti-business, anti-employer activists. They're not representing the communities. This is Representative Emily Sirota, who's probably never worked a real job in her life, I imagine. Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez, who's never had any responsibility, and Julie Gonzalez and Faith Winter. Now, all these legislators, of course, are from the Denver. One of them is from Adams County. These people are trying to hold all of Colorado hostage. Now, shameful is one word for it. Fines for violations range from $200 to $500. Uh, if a court determines an employer violated certain parts of the bill, the employee must be reinstated or rehired with or without back pay in the greater of either $10,000 or any lost pay from the violation. Absolutely and utterly insane. This bill would be devastating for small restaurants in Colorado and make it nearly impossible for them to operate without these arbitrary regulations infringing on their ability to operate. This bill does disservice to the community, to anybody who likes to go to a restaurant or beverage to a bar. I mean, this bill would destroy restaurants and bars in Colorado. Absolutely and utterly shameful. You can imagine that this would lead to less employment overall, less opportunities, and increased costs all around. Moving on, 9 News. Try not to go into 9 News too often because it is such a propaganda-based organization, in my opinion. But let's take a look. Denver government to ban TikTok from city-owned devices. So it's interesting to see that TikTok is now the new punching bag for people in government. You know, no mention, of course, of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Google, these other organizations that are pulling data from all government devices and taking all the information. But because it's Chinese, they don't think that they should be able to have them on their phones. So kind of interesting. The reason, of course, is because the app can capture data such as passwords or personally identifiable information, and the city has no way of guaranteeing the information won't be improperly kept on servers in China. So, of course, you know, this xenophobia, I guess is the right word. Well, I'll tell you one thing, guys. I mean, China is just going to buy this data from Facebook. They're just going to buy it from Twitter. This data is already being collected by American companies, and to somehow think that this is going to stop the proliferation of data mining is kind of silly. But just another example of this anti-China rhetoric that we're seeing in the community. And of course, you know, we got to get some of those politicians, these big level politicians on board. Democratic Senator Michael Bennet recently called for Apple and Google to remove TikTok from their app stores. Republican Representative Ken Buck proposed legislation to ban TikTok nationwide. I mean, absolutely and utterly ridiculous. So there we go. Moving on. Another sad article, I suppose. Fortunately, you know, there's a lot of bad news going on in Colorado, but I think it's important that you're informed and know what's happening. So, Colorado Democrats kill bill that would protect children from forced COVID-19 vaccination. This is from campfirecolorado.com, February 8th, 2023. On February 7th, the Health and Insurance Committee of the Colorado State Legislature killed House Bill 1029, prohibit COVID-19 vaccine to minor without consent. The bill was sponsored by Representative Brandy Bradley, who is also a dedicated healthcare worker and a mother. Representative Bradley began this committee stating simply that, quote, this bill will protect kids, end quote. House Bill 1029 prohibits the requirement of a COVID-19 vaccine for a minor in Colorado, as well as, quote, administering a COVID-19 vaccine to a child without the informed consent of the child's parent or legal guardian, end quote. Yeah, I mean, with concerns of getting kicked off YouTube, the COVID-19 vaccines can be harmful, especially to children. And unfortunately, parents who don't want their children to be injected with these drugs do not have a lot of allies in our state legislature. Moving on. An opinion piece from Ben Murray on coloradopolitics.com. Killed Bill exposed Dems' disingenuousness on TABOR. Now, I don't mean to be entirely beating up on Colorado Democrats, but it just so happens that they're in power and their policies they're pushing are authoritarian and, in some regards, unconstitutional. Citing record inflation to Murray's article, those are my words, not Murray's, but let's get to what Murray says. Citing record inflation, Colorado Democrats passed legislation last year that sent out TABOR refunds early. Now, last week, Democrats voted along party lines to kill a bill that would have had the same effect. Their about-face opposition to the bill gives new life to previous allegations that Democrats sent out last year's refunds early, not because they wanted to help Coloradans weather record inflation, but to boost favor from voters before the midterms election. Of course, I mean, it's obvious that these Democrats were sending out our taxpayer refunds right before the election to try and earn votes from the people. I mean, it's pretty obvious. So Murray continues, in effect, the bill would have allowed Colorado wage earners to keep more money with every paycheck rather than giving the state a tax revenue surplus and waiting a year or more to get the money back as a refund. Because the bill would have reduced state revenues by only $450 million, less than the amount of anticipated future taxpayer refunds, the change would have zero impact on the state budget. Michael Fields of Advanced Colorado said, quote, Governor Polis and Democratic lawmakers want you to think it's some kind of gift from them, but really this is just an election year gimmick to try and get your vote, end quote. Very, very true. The Colorado politicians, especially the Democrats, want to steal our money as much as possible. These are my words, in my opinion, and it's really shameful. And you can see it in what's happening with this bill, as Ben Murray explains in his article. It exposes how the Democrats want to get rid of TABOR. I mean, it's part of their party platform, for heaven's sakes. They want to take away our tax refunds and keep that money for their own pet projects. Last article I want to cover this week is from the Gazette. DenverGazette.com doesn't always have great opinions, but this time they do. Blame Governor Polis for energy poverty, from February 10th, 2023. Irate customers complained about soaring energy costs at a recent meeting of the Colorado Public Utility Commission. Governor Polis responded, directing state agencies to do something, to fix a problem he caused. The governor's directive came after members of the Public Utilities Commission reportedly smirked and laughed at ratepayers who told tragic stories of utility bills quadrupling. I just spoke with an older gentleman on SSI, and he has his heat all the way down to 60 degrees to keep his bill down. Testified Sabrina Padilla of the Chronic Care Collaborative at a PUC meeting. He's sacrificing his body temperature to wear his oxygen and keep his bills down. Polis emerged as an anti-energy crusader while representing Boulder in Congress in 2013. With a net worth of hundreds of millions of dollars, Polis filed a suit to stop Weld County hard hat workers from drilling for oil and gas near one of his vacation homes. In his lawsuit, Polis claimed the temporary fracking work caused, quote, mental suffering, annoyance, and the loss of use and enjoyment, end quote, of the property. In an article he wrote for the Boulder Daily Camera, Polis said oil and gas extraction caused relatives to live in his Boulder home as, quote, refugees from the rural estate. Wow. I mean, Jared Polis, as we know, is an anti-energy crusader. So is his spouse. And these people are really trying to restrict our ability to keep ourselves warm. I mean, as shocking as that seems, it's the reality. As governor, Polis has promoted an expensive transition to renewable energy, power plants that raise utility rates. He championed and signed into law Senate Bill 181 in 2019. The bill eliminates traditional exemptions granted to oil and gas operations from county noise restrictions. It authorizes sweeping local restrictions on oil and gas. It amended the Oil and Gas Conservation Act to emphasize environmental protection over production. So, I mean, the reality is these politicians like Jared Polis, they're snakes. You can't believe what they say. The reality is Jared Polis and the state legislature is responsible for why your heating bills are so high, why gas at the pump is so high, and it's really going to take the outrage and actions of citizens to change that. Well, this was your weekly roundup this week. I hope it wasn't all bad news, but unfortunately, there's some reality to what's happening in our state. Uh, Thank you very much for your time and see you next week.